if you look at these two things, right, in some ways, both your work in poetry and in the theatre kind of developed in parallel.
Yes. Same.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about what led you to write each piece? So what led you to write Coming Home Baby, and what led you to write Are You There, Singapore?
Coming Home Baby was the result of what I had written in the decade of the 60s. And it's quite an interesting story that I told in Roots, that when I submitted the manuscript, one of the editors of Federal Publications was actually Wong Mei. Yeah. She looked at my manuscript and she gave me this advice. She said, I noticed that your poems include some early poems which is described usually as juvenilia. I think you should take them out because juvenilia is of interest only to critics. If you would become very famous, they will study your juvenilia. So why don't you just publish the poems that are good, that are realized? And I thought that was pretty good advice. And I took her advice, and the result is Coming Home Baby minus the juvenilia. But what I didn't know about Wong Mei then was I knew the Wong Mei who had published in 7 Poets, but I didn't know that she had already by that time published a Bad Girl's Book of Animals.
So you hadn't read that?
She had published it already.
But you had not read?
I don't read, didn't even know, but she didn't reveal it. The Wong Mei I knew was the Wong Mei whose poems appeared in 7 Poets, edited by Tambo. I cannot remember the date.
So what about your play?
The play was accidental, as I told you.
But how did you come to write
Well,
it?
the impetus for writing plays, I think, comes from having been a student in London and 66 to 68, having to create a new nation and talking to Singapore students who were there with me, Malaysian students and students abroad who have gone through the same period of decolonization. When I came back to Singapore, what I heard in my ears was animated talk. Dangerous talk even about new nations, decolonization, the freedom to write on anything you want to write about, and so on and so forth. So I said, these sort of things cannot go into poems. It ought to get into a play. And before I knew it, I was already writing a play, which I think I finished in fairly quickly. Then I showed it to a friend called Katie Joseph, who was interested in the Singaporean play. And he helped me edit it and improve upon it. Then I was ready to take it to a Singaporean director. This was late 68, 69, 70. But no Singaporean director was interested. I left for Bangkok. I forgot that I had written a play. Completely.
You mentioned earlier that you felt the subject matter was more suitable for a play than a poem, right? And I think something quite remarkable is that you've written, poetry, prose, drama, and libretti for opera. So how do you decide which form to write?
Sometimes it's luck. When I wrote the libretto for Fences, it was commissioned. Liao Siak Fa, the founder of lyric opera and the man who, to my mind, introduced Western opera into Singapore arts. And opera, not just Western opera, but opera because there are now Singaporeans who write operas. He got John Shapley, the composer, and I together and said, I have a story for you. Can you both together write this opera provided you like the story? And the story he gave me was a kind of Romeo and Juliet story in which a devout but liberal Muslim called Nora, that was the name I gave her subsequently, in Malaya Hall in the 60s, meets a cheeky Singaporean. And this was the period after separation, before separation and after separation. And he said, what do you think of the subject? And I said, I like the idea. because it is about politics. I'm always drawn to politics. And John Shapley said he liked the idea too. Then I asked the crucial question, which comes first, the music or the words? Because I'm musically illiterate. So he said the words come first. So then I said we've got something going together. So I will write the words and pass it to John. And John will take a look at the words, see if he likes it, and write the music from there. So to answer your question, how young, I figured that if I have written plays, I have written poetry, I can write the libretto, because really it's the play and lyrics, you know. In this case, they could be an aria or they could be choruses. So I took up the challenge.
We should also maybe talk a little bit about your novel, which is The Adventures of Holden Hing. Maybe tell us a little bit about how that came about.
It's a kind of farewell to being a bachelor. And I think myself that it's a funny novel which I wrote entirely in my head. I was thinking about it, and wherever I go, I was turning the episodes and the words in my head. And the inspiration for that particular novel is a quote from Ambrose Bierce, Bierce, who has written a wonderful dictionary called the Devil's Dictionary. You know that? And he defined a bachelor as a man whom women are still sampling. So that really is what The Adventures of Holden Hing was about. The interesting thing about Holden Hing was that it was launched in the Raffles Hotel.
Wow.
Yeah. How come the Raffles Hotel would welcome a Singaporean writer? You know, their snooty Raffles Hotel. Because the general manager was an Italian who I think single-handedly rescued the Raffles Hotel, because at one stage it was in danger of being demolished. Roberto Pregas. I got along very well with him. And I asked him, can I launch your book in the Raffles Hotel? He said, sure. So that's a bit of history there. Launching my novel, my only novel in the Raffles Hotel. I've got pictures, and in fact, in Roots too, I tell the story of the launch.
That's a good reason to buy the book. To buy Roots too.
Do you think it's possible in this day and age publish your next book in Raffles Hotel?
No, it's very difficult, because I think the same snootiness might still prevail.
No way today. I shouldn't say no way. I like to see somebody try.
Yes,
Why
I think
not?
we should try.
Because our writers are getting to be internationally known, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. So why not? If they weren't so snooty.
We can move on to poetry now. So my impression of Singlit now is that it is heavily dominated by poetry. I'm not sure how valid that view is, and I don't know if Daryl shares that view. So has it always been this way?
Poetry has always been steadily written over the decades. From the time when Edwin Tambu published Rib of Earth, I think, when was it? In the 50s or 60s? 50s. And then Wong Pinam came and Yi Tiang Hong came. When I was an undergraduate in the first or second year, Tambu and Tiang Hong were invited by Prof. D.J. Enright, the English poet and head of department, to come and read. So for the first time, those of us who aspired to write were able to meet Singaporean Malaysian writer poets Yi Tiang Hong and Edwin Tambu.
Yeah, that must have been quite the moment, because before that, all the poets had been largely white poets
Right.
in the textbooks, and
But
they studied.
we didn't know about the Teo brothers.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. I asked Edwin Tambu when he was compiling his anthology, what is it called? Second Time. Yeah. If he knew about the Teo brothers. He said he didn't know. So actually our modern poetry, if you like, would begin with the Teo brothers. But if you didn't know the Teo brothers, then our modern poetry would begin with Edwin Tambu and Yi Tiang Hong. But the Teo brothers was a surprise, you know.
Do you have a guess as to why a poetry has been such a dominant form in Singapore?
I agree with Edwin Tambu. He said in one forum in the National Museum, the poems we write mostly are short poems. and they are easier to write because they're short. They are answers to the moment, a moment of inspiration. I like to use the word provocation, a moment of provocation. Novels take a long time, plays take a long time. Perhaps the alternative could be the short story. But until recently, when we have this flash fiction, it still took some time to write a short story in answer to a provocation. You know what I mean? Poems. You can just scribble or you can write a haiku and later on you can revise it into something longer. You know what I mean? But I think there was a period in the late 70s, 80s and 90s when plays took over. And I was happy to be involved in that period because I chaired two national committees. One, the Drama Advisory Committee, and then another committee, the Drama Review Committee, until 1991. So I lived through what I would call was an exciting period of theatre. Robin Loon, the NUS academic, has called that period the golden age of Singaporean theatre in English. And through a series of reasons which I will talk about later, the theatre was able to produce a succession of very interesting young playwrights and directors who, over a period of about 20 years, produce one play after another to give us what I think is a canon of plays. I could name the players and their plays, and the fact that they were able to tackle themes which were very exciting. Let me look at my list. During that period, they tackled the following things: questioning the system, the entire system. And the person who did it was Ko Pao Kun in The Coffin is Too Big for the Hole. Singapore politics, that's myself and Tan Tan Hao. Lesbian relationships, Eleanor Wong. Violence against women, Talak by Ellen Govan. Feminism, Ovidia Yu, Woman on a Tree on a Hill. Mental illness, Haresh Sharma in Off Center, which became a school text. Pedophilia, Desmond Sim in a play called Autumn Tom Yam. And questioning housing politics, third stage. So I think it was an interesting period when theatre became professional. You know, there was a terrific buzz about theatre. And you asked me about the work of the Drama Advisory Committee, Hao Yang. The committee advised the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Community Development. And the ministry organized the following activities which made theatre buzz: playwriting competitions, drama festivals. There was 10 years of the drama festival, arts festivals, ASEAN festivals, grants to theatre companies, review of plays submitted for performance, theatre homes, and so on and so forth. It made theatre sort of cool, you know, and theatre was not only cool, but it was live. You could take part. If you an audience, you're not part of the play, you go there and see your friends take part in the play or have behind the scene roles. And I think it produced, to my mind, three figures who are today internationally known in my view. Of course, the late Ko Pao Kun, Ong Keng Sen, and Haresh Sharma. So during that period, theatre was dominant because it was seen to be cool.
Which is kind of surprising because I'd expect, like political repression or like OB markers, all of that to be stronger back then as compared to now. But it seems that theatre was much livelier back then, the theatre scene.
Oh yes, there were incidents, some of which were reported, some of which were not. When my play was passed, 1 year back home was passed for production, for staging in 1980, the person who wrote the letter to me, and I had been corresponding with ministry people, when she wrote to me to say, we have no objection to the staging of 1 Year Back Home, signed so and so, controller of undesirable publications. In other words, in the 80s or during that period, plays that talk about politics that mention Lee Siew Cho or Lim Chin Siong were seen as possibly leftist, pro-communist documents. Forum Theatre, I think in 1994, two of the Forum Theatre people, Arvind Tan and Harish Sharma, attended a workshop in New York. And the Straits Times said that they attended Marxist workshops. And they were practicing a form of theatre called Forum Theatre, in which the audience was encouraged to intervene to propose an ending. They were seen as being under Marxist influence, and Forum Theatre was forbidden for a decade. Licenses have been known to be issued 1 or 2 days before performance, and things like that. Grants were denied to plays that did not toe the line, and so on and so forth. So, yes, it was that period of playwriting when the censor was very active. I don't think poets ever faced the censors. Novelists may. I mean, people like Gopal Bharathan can be quite controversial. You know. So there was a period when I think poetry was not dominant. Plays were dominant.